My parents betrayed me before college for my sister. So I left home and bought her business years later. The morning light spilled across the kitchen counter, soft and gold, catching the steam that rose from my coffee. It should have been an ordinary Saturday, quiet, familiar, filled with the smell of toast and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I had spent the night before double-checking my packing list. Extra long twin sheets, textbooks bought secondhand online, a used laptop I'd paid for in installments from my summer job. Everything was ready. Everything had a plan until that moment. My dad sat across from me, reading the paper like he did every morning, his silver wedding ring tapping the edge of his mug in a steady rhythm, tap, tap, tap. It wasn't a nervous habit, it was his prelude. He always did it when he was about to deliver a lesson about life. My mother stood by the sink, her voice too calm, too smooth, like she'd rehearsed it in her head. "Honey," she began, not looking directly at me. "Your father and I need to tell you something important." I smiled politely, the kind of smile you wear when you expect small news, not a bombshell. My dad folded the paper and said it as if announcing the weather. "We gave your tuition money to your sister. Her business needs it more right now." The words didn't land all at once. They slid across the table like spilled coffee, slow, sticky, irreversible. My mom added, "You should be proud of yourself, Harper. You're helping your family. That's what it means to be part of something bigger." Her tone was almost tender, as if she expected me to thank her. I didn't. I looked down at the salt shaker, the small white grains scattered across the wooden table. My throat tightened, but not with tears, with clarity. They weren't telling me this because they felt guilty. They were telling me because they wanted me to agree, to nod and prove I was the good daughter who knew her place. No one mentioned my college acceptance letter still pinned to the fridge behind them, or the emails from the scholarship office I'd worked so hard to earn. No one asked what I'd do now, where the rest of my tuition would come from, or how it felt to have my future traded away like spare change. My father leaned back, satisfied with his delivery, and sipped his coffee. My mother smiled faintly, waiting for me to say something that would make it easier for them. But there was nothing left to say. The clock ticked above the microwave. The smell of scrambled eggs turned sour in my stomach. I wanted to laugh at how surreal it all was, how two people could strip years of effort away in one sentence and still expect applause. I set my fork down carefully, the way you set down something fragile, and stood up. My mother frowned. "Where are you going?" she asked softly, as if I were being dramatic. I said, "To pack." My father exhaled, muttering something about me needing time to cool off. They didn't follow me. They didn't ask where I'd go, or how I'd manage. Maybe they assumed I'd come crawling back when I realized life was expensive. Maybe they believed they'd done the right thing. Upstairs, sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting across the half-empty room. I opened my closet and started folding clothes with mechanical precision: jeans, t-shirts, notebooks, the same order I'd used when preparing for college. Only now, it wasn't for a dorm room. It was for leaving. Each item I packed felt like a promise breaking free from their hands. My acceptance folder went into the bottom of the suitcase. It wasn't worthless, it was just delayed. I glanced once more at the photo on my dresser. Sienna, smiling at her store's ribbon-cutting ceremony, our parents flanking her like proud investors. My stomach turned. I told myself it was just a pause, a reset, a week away until they realized how cruel that breakfast had been. But deep down, I knew better. It hadn't started that morning, it had been building for years, one small imbalance at a time, until the scale tipped and I finally saw the truth. I had never really been their equal. I was the insurance plan. The dependable one. The quiet second act after Sienna's show. Sienna had always been the headline. When we were kids, our family orbit revolved around her moods, her projects, her next big idea. If she painted one crooked flower on construction paper, Mom framed it. If I won the district spelling bee, they said, "That's great, Harper, but don't brag." My parents didn't hate me, they just didn't see me. Not really. I was the quiet, efficient background of their success story, the one they relied on to keep things running smoothly while they clapped for Sienna. When we were 10 and 16, Dad liked to say, "Sienna's got leadership in her blood, Harper's just steady." The word steady followed me like a polite curse. It meant safe, predictable, invisible. It meant they could count on me to do the right thing, even when no one else did. And maybe that's why I never rebelled. Maybe that's why I tried so hard to be the kind of daughter they'd finally notice for the right reasons. I remember the summer I turned 12. Dad came into my room with a big grin and told me, "I opened a college fund for you today." He ruffled my hair, said, "Keep those grades up, kiddo. You'll thank us someday." And I did keep them up. Honor roll, volunteer hours, 0 detentions. I built my teenage years around that promise, believing that hard work equaled fairness. I didn't realize fairness had fine print. Meanwhile, Sienna bounced from one dream to another like she was trying on personalities. Ballet classes for 3 months. Photography for 6. Then she decided to start a business. It began with a folding table at local craft fairs, selling handmade candles and embroidered tote bags. Mom posted every photo like it was a corporate IPO. "My girl has vision," she'd caption, proud as if Sienna had just cured cancer. Dad called her our little entrepreneur. When the sales slowed, they treated it as a challenge, not a warning. Dad took out a small loan to give her a chance. Mom helped design the logo. They let her turn the garage into a workspace and bought her a new camera. I wasn't jealous, at least, not at first. I actually thought it was kind of exciting, watching her chase something she loved. But as months passed, I started noticing the small ways the world bent for her. The chores she forgot, but I was asked to finish. The excuses they made on her behalf. "She's under a lot of pressure," Mom would say. "You're better at handling stress." By senior year of high school, the pattern was carved in stone. Sienna's small shop had become Willow and Wire, a boutique filled with candles, macrame, and handmade jewelry, mostly funded by my parents, who now referred to it as the family business. They went to every pop-up event she hosted, wore her logo on their t-shirts, and handed out flyers at church. When I got my acceptance letter to Ohio State, they said, "That's wonderful, Harper. Maybe you can help Sienna with her website while you're in school." That was the moment it clicked. I wasn't the daughter they celebrated. I was the labor behind their pride. The final months before college were a blur of double shifts at a diner called Benny's Grill. The manager was strict, but he paid in cash, and I saved every dollar. The regulars liked me. They'd call me the kid with the spreadsheet because I tracked everything: tips, hours, even meal discounts. My parents thought it was cute, but never once asked why I was saving so obsessively. If they had, maybe I would have told them I didn't trust their promises anymore. Sienna, meanwhile, bought herself a second-hand Jeep, business expenses, she said, co-signed by Dad, of course. When I asked to borrow it once to drive to a college interview, she laughed. "Sorry, Harp. I need it for deliveries. You can take Mom's car if it's not raining." It was raining. I went anyway. I don't think there was ever one moment when the love disappeared. It was quieter than that, the way neglect always is. It wasn't abuse or cruelty. It was absence. It was every small choice that said, "Sienna matters more." On my 18th birthday, Mom forgot to bake a cake, so she handed me a gift bag from the grocery store. Inside was a notebook and a pen set. "For college notes," she said, already distracted by Sienna's new online launch. I smiled, thanked her, and went back upstairs. I wrote on the first page, "Never depend on promises that cost them nothing." The night before I left for Austin, I took the shoebox out from under my bed. Inside were 2 years of tips, crumpled bills, coins, a few envelopes from regulars who'd given me extra for textbooks. It added up to $950. Not enough to start a new life, but enough to get far enough away to think. I slid the box into my duffel bag, tucked my acceptance folder beside it, and sat in the dark for a long time. From downstairs, I could hear the faint murmur of my parents watching Sienna's interview on a local business podcast. They laughed at her jokes, clapped when the host called her the face of the modern maker movement. I waited until they turned off the lights. Then I slipped my backpack on and looked around my room one last time. The walls were covered in college brochures, each one now meaningless but still mine. Outside, the night air was humid and heavy. I called a cab, dragging my bags down the driveway while the crickets screamed like sirens. The house behind me stayed dark. Not a single window flickered. No one noticed I was leaving, not yet. Maybe they'd assume I was cooling off. Maybe they'd think I'd come home once I realized how hard life could be without them. But as the taxi pulled away, I looked at that house shrinking in the rearview mirror and thought, it's not that they didn't love me, they just loved her louder. And that silence, my silence, was about to become my loudest answer. Austin didn't feel like freedom at first. It felt like noise, heat, car horns, the smell of oil and tacos drifting through the air. The city pulsed with people who seemed to know exactly where they were going, and for the first time in my life, I didn't. The cab dropped me off in front of a narrow brick building that leaned slightly to the left, wedged between a pawn shop and a bakery that smelled like burnt sugar. My apartment was really just a room above a taco stand, with one window that looked out over an alley and a fan that made more noise than wind. Rent was $400 a month, cash only, no lease, no questions. It wasn't home, but it was mine. The first week, I barely spoke to anyone. I spent the mornings walking the city, learning bus routes, memorizing where the cheap stores were. I found a diner that would hire me for the night shift, washing dishes, mopping floors, filling ice bins. The manager, Luis, didn't care about my lack of experience. You show up, you stay sober, you keep your head down, he said. That's it. I nodded. That I could do. The hours were long. I came home at 2 or 3 in the morning with wet sleeves and aching hands. The room always smelled faintly of fried onions from the taco stand below. I'd shower, eat whatever scraps I'd packed, and fall asleep to the hum of the ceiling fan. There were nights I'd wake in a panic, thinking I'd made a huge mistake, that I'd thrown away security for stubborn pride. But then I'd picture my parents' kitchen table, my father's ring tapping the mug, my mother's bright, rehearsed smile. And I'd remember. I hadn't walked away from safety. I'd walked away from permission. By day, I lived in the library. It was cool and silent and smelled like old paper and possibility. I didn't have Wi-Fi at home, so I spent hours hunched over a computer in the corner, reading everything I could about small business logistics, supply chains, inventory management. The words didn't come easy at first, but the logic did. It made sense to me, the cause and effect, the systems beneath the chaos. If my sister had been chaos wrapped in glitter, I wanted to become order wrapped in quiet. I tried a few small projects, the kind of online side hustles YouTube promised could make you rich overnight. Dropshipping gadgets from China, freelancing as a virtual assistant for $5 an hour. They all failed spectacularly. My PayPal account froze twice, and I lost nearly $400, nearly half my savings, on a marketing course that turned out to be a scam. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed that night, staring at my cracked laptop screen, the glow flickering against the peeling wallpaper. The air smelled like grease and disappointment. But giving up wasn't an option. It never had been. I made a new rule. If I failed, I had to write down why. Every mistake became a note, a pattern, a formula I could fix later. You can't lose, I wrote, if you're still learning. It was a small lie I told myself just to keep moving, but sometimes survival is built on small lies. I learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed. My diet became a rotation of instant noodles, eggs, and canned soup. I timed my laundry for free water days, walked instead of taking buses, and collected receipts to track every cent. On Sunday nights, I opened an Excel sheet and logged everything: income, expenses, goals. The file name was Light One. XLSX, though I didn't know why I called it that yet. There were days when the loneliness felt like a second job. I'd hear laughter from the street below, couples eating tacos, music spilling out from a bar across the block. I'd look at my reflection in the window and barely recognize the girl staring back pale, tired, too serious for 19. I missed the version of me who thought the world was fair. I missed believing that effort and love were enough. But then something shifted. One afternoon in the library, I overheard a woman complaining about her online store. She couldn't keep track of inventory between her Etsy page and her local stock. Her problem sounded small, but to me, it was a puzzle I could solve. I leaned over, shyly, and suggested a free inventory tracker I'd read about. She thanked me, tried it, and 2 weeks later returned, beaming. "It worked," she said. "You saved me a fortune." That moment, just that small proof that I could make something better, was the first breath of air after drowning. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. "No one owes me an opportunity, but I owe myself one try." I taped that sentence to the wall above my bed. It stayed there long after the tape yellowed. I stopped searching for shortcuts and started studying fundamentals. How to manage supplier schedules, how to calculate reorder points, how to create efficiency maps for small businesses. It wasn't glamorous. There was no applause, no mentors, no startup funds, just quiet work done in the glow of a cheap screen. A month later, at a thrift store near campus, I found a small brass desk lamp. It was scratched and dented, but when I plugged it in, the light was warm and steady, the color of honey. The shopkeeper said, $5 if you can carry it yourself. I carried it all the way home. That night, when I set it on my desk, the light filled the room like a heartbeat. I named it Light One, the first thing I owned that didn't come from anyone's permission. Sometimes, after a long shift, I'd sit under that lamp with my notebook open, listening to the city's muffled pulse below. I wasn't rich. I wasn't even safe yet. But I was alive, building something invisible but real: discipline, resilience, the kind of quiet that hums instead of screams. And somewhere deep inside me, a voice began to whisper, calm and certain. This is how it starts. It started with a candle shop. A tiny, cramped space tucked between a yoga studio and a vape store, its front window always fogged with waxy fingerprints and the faint smell of lavender. I used to pass it every night on my way to the bus stop after work, the same help wanted sign taped crookedly on the glass. One evening, curiosity or maybe desperation made me push the door open. Inside, the air was thick with vanilla and something sweeter, the kind of scent that tried too hard to feel comforting. A woman behind the counter looked up, exhausted. Her name was Marta. She told me she was the owner, that business had been fine until it wasn't. I asked what she meant, and she waved at the shelves crowded with candles in mismatched jars. "I'm either out of everything or drowning in too much," she said. "I never know what to reorder or when." She was losing money every week ordering too much of the slow sellers and not enough of what people actually wanted. That night, back in my tiny apartment, I built her a spreadsheet. It wasn't fancy, just columns for SKUs, reorder points, and daily sales volume, but it gave her something she'd never had before. A system. The next morning, I brought it to her, free of charge. Marta looked at the printout like it was a magic trick. "So, I just put in numbers and it tells me when to order?" she asked. "Exactly," I said. 3 weeks later, she called me, her voice bright for the first time. "I don't know what you did, but I'm finally keeping up. No overstock, no empty shelves. I saved $1,700 this month." I didn't tell her it wasn't magic. It was math. But math had a way of making miracles look easy. Marta introduced me to a friend who ran a small skincare studio, and suddenly I had a second client. Then a third. None of it was formal, and I had no company name, no invoices, just PayPal transfers labeled, "Thank you." But the pattern was clear. These small business owners didn't need flashy branding or TikTok strategies. They needed structure. And structure was what I understood best. That week, I stayed up late in the library again, researching how to register a business in Texas. It cost $200 to file an LLC, which felt impossible, but I did it anyway. I called it Quiet Harbor Ops Consulting. The name came to me at 2 a.m. when I realized that's what I wanted to be for people: a harbor, calm amid their chaos. I built a simple website using a free template and wrote every word myself. Operations strategy for small creative brands: simple, transparent, scalable. I didn't have testimonials or a portfolio, but I had one thing most consultants didn't: proof that I'd made someone's life easier. Within a month, I had 3 paying clients, each sending me data they didn't understand but trusted me to fix. I charged $400 for the first audit, then $750, and by the third, I asked for $1,000 and they said yes without hesitation. It wasn't luck, it was value. One afternoon, I was working in a co-working space downtown, a small converted warehouse with mismatched furniture and terrible coffee, when I met Jordan Lee. He was hunched over a laptop covered in stickers, sketching wireframes for a local tech startup. We ended up sitting across from each other for hours, both lost in our screens. When the Wi-Fi crashed, we finally talked. Jordan told me he was a UX designer who freelanced for small businesses, helping them make their websites less confusing. I told him I worked on operations, which he found fascinating because, as he said, most creative founders treat operations like an afterthought until it kills them. We exchanged numbers, promising to collaborate someday. I didn't expect much. People in co-working spaces said things like that all the time, but a week later, he texted, "Got a client drowning in orders. Wanna fix them together?" The client was a boutique jewelry brand that had gone viral on Instagram and had no idea how to handle the sudden flood of orders. Their packaging costs were bleeding money, shipments were delayed, and their website kept crashing. Jordan redesigned the site while I rebuilt their fulfillment system from scratch. In 10 days, we cut their return rate in half and doubled their processing speed. When the owner sent our payment, $2,000 split between us, it felt like the first time I'd ever been compensated fairly for what I knew. Jordan and I kept working together. We made a good team. He made things beautiful. I made them work. By the end of the year, we'd helped half a dozen local brands, each one more complicated than the last. I learned how to write contracts, how to file quarterly taxes, how to say no when someone tried to underpay me for exposure. The business grew slowly, but steadily. My nights no longer smelled like dish soap and fryer oil. I quit the diner, moved into a small one-bedroom with a window big enough to let in morning light. The rent was still tight, but when I turned on my brass lamp each night light one, it no longer felt like survival lighting. It felt like proof. By the third quarter, Quiet Harbor was making over $5,000 a month. I wasn't rich, but for the first time, the balance sheet wasn't bleeding red. Every dollar had purpose: taxes, savings, reinvestment. I even opened a separate business account, signing the papers with shaking hands. The banker asked if I had employees. "Not yet," I said, and it surprised me how certain that sounded. I sent Marta a thank you card with a note inside. "You were my first client. You proved I wasn't invisible." She texted back a picture of her new candle label. It read, "Light Harbor," a tiny nod to my company. It made me laugh, then cry. Jordan started calling us the Quiet Fixers. We didn't chase trends or pitch investors. We just solved problems that no one else had the patience to untangle. Our work was small, clean, and precise, like resetting a broken watch. And maybe that was the first real difference between me and my family. They loved the noise, the launches, the applause, the performance of success. But I'd learned to love the silence of things working exactly as they should. One night, as I sat under my lamp reviewing invoices, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. Something entirely my own. The thought came softly, without fanfare, but it felt like standing on solid ground after years of sinking. Everything was legal, everything was simple, everything worked. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Growth didn't arrive like a drum roll. It arrived like a checklist I kept finishing before noon. The more I showed up for small brands, the more they showed up for me. After the candle shop and the jewelry client, I stopped thinking of operations as a bandage and started treating it like architecture. I built living systems for people who made beautiful things but bled money in the boring parts: purchase orders, reorder points, pick divided by pack accuracy, vendor SLAs. I created simple dashboards that told the truth in one screen. Units on hand, units in transit, lead times, safety stock, cash conversion cycle. When owners saw their chaos collapse into 3 charts and a short action list, their shoulders dropped. Order quiet, unfussy was addictive. Referrals snowballed. A boutique furniture maker hired me to untangle a warehouse that looked like a yard sale hand turned stools lost behind imported credenzas, SKUs duplicated with slightly different hyphenation, purchase orders stapled to boxes like ransom notes. I mapped flow from receiving to bin locations, color-coded aisle labels, killed dead SKUs, and imposed a weekly cycle count. Freight spend fell 12% in a month just by consolidating LTL pickups. A clean beauty brand found me next. They were out of bestseller serums for 9 days every month because a single component, the frosted glass dropper, kept missing inbound. I reworked their supplier mix, added an alternate domestic source with a higher unit cost but guaranteed availability, and built a reorder trigger tied to sales velocity instead of gut feelings. Stockouts vanished. Net margin ticked up. A gift company that lived on holiday volume brought me in September, begging for a miracle. We didn't do miracles, we did math. We forecasted by SKU, pruned the hero line to avoid cannibalization, and booked seasonal labor 2 months early. December didn't break them, it baptized them. I stopped freelancing hours and started selling outcomes. Quiet Harbor's proposals grew teeth: discovery, baseline metrics, design, implementation, 60-day stabilization with a post-mortem. Jordan became the second brain to my nervous system. If I made the engine hum, he made the cockpit readable. He rebuilt storefronts with fewer clicks to check out, cleaned product taxonomy so search actually worked, and designed order tracking pages that prevented customer anxiety, and with it, ticket volume. I'd sit across from him in the co-working space, our laptops glowing in the same honey light, and watch in real time as returns dipped after we fixed a size guide, or as average order value crept up after he simplified bundles. We weren't storytellers, we were tuners. Quiet Harbor stopped feeling like a scrappy favor and started behaving like a firm. By the end of my 3rd year in Austin, the numbers stopped whispering and started speaking plainly. Revenue, $2.4 million. Cost of delivery, predictable. Net before tax, just over $400,000. I stared at the profit and loss one late Thursday and felt something I'd never let myself entertain: safety. Not extravagant, not performative, just a floor that wouldn't give out when I stepped on it. I paid our quarterly taxes the second invoices landed. I set aside runway. I built a rule I still keep: if a win can't survive a spreadsheet, it's not a win. When our banker suggested a line of credit for flexibility, I smiled and said we'd revisit after another year of disciplined cash. We weren't going to buy speed, we were going to buy clarity. Clarity told me to separate the house from the furniture. Quiet Harbor was a services engine, valuable, but human-heavy and reputational. The intellectual property, the frameworks, templates, code snippets, standard operating procedures needed a vault. I formed a holding company, Nova Finch LLC, to own the assets, trademarks, the Quiet Harbor name, our dashboards, and any software we'd build. My attorney filed the paperwork. My name appeared where it had to and disappeared where it could. We shifted our client contracts so that licensing flowed from Nova Finch. Taxes grew slightly more complex, and so did my sleep. Better, not worse. The day the filing came through, I took the bus to the lake, sat on a shaded bench, and read the stamped pages like love letters to the future. No confetti, just proof. With the shell in place, we turned the guts of our playbooks into code. Jordan led product. I appointed myself product manager by temperament and necessity. We built quiet systems, a lightweight layer that sat over the tools our clients already used and stitched them into a single nervous system. Shopify, ShipStation, Airtable, QuickBooks, where data used to fracture, we made it talk. We didn't chase AI fanfare, we chased reliability. Automatic reorder suggestions based on true velocity, lead time variability baked into safety stock, exception alerts that meant something. You're 3 days from a stockout on SKU, a 17 unless you expedite component D. Implementation took a week, not months. The interface was what Jordan called frictionlessly boring, the highest compliment in our world. We priced it like a working person would respect, a base fee small brands could stomach, plus a performance rider when key metrics improved. Our first 10 deployments paid for themselves inside 2 billing cycles. After 20, quiet systems stopped being a line on proposals and started being the proposal. That's when the client mix shifted. We still loved tiny shops. Marta's candle store would always be our origin story, but regional brands began to knock. A furniture cooperative spanned 3 warehouses across 2 states. Quiet Systems gave their ops manager a single pane of glass and gave me the deepest joy I know, the moment metrics turned faithful. A clean beauty conglomerate tested us on 1 division, then rolled us to 3 more after customer service tickets fell nearly 30% on the back of timely, honest order updates. A national gift distributor, skeptical and weary, let us audit a single SKU family. We found $86,000 a year trapped in mismatched case packs and wasteful returns. They signed a 2-year deal. I bought better lights for the office but kept light 1 on my desk, its brass still scarred. I started paying myself a salary I wouldn't be embarrassed to disclose to an auditor. I maxed out retirement accounts I hadn't known how to spell 3 years earlier. When a friend asked what it felt like to be rich, I told her I didn't feel rich. I felt permitted to think long-term. My past had taught me that the opposite of poverty wasn't opulence. It was runway. Jordan and I formalized titles because clients liked knowing where responsibility lived. He took CTO. I took CEO. On paper, the holding company held us both, and in public, the work spoke louder than our names. We chose invisibility on purpose. No panel, circuit vanity, no performative LinkedIn sermons, no founder selfies beside rented cars. We documented our process like engineers, not influencers. The hires we brought in 2 analysts, 1 implementation lead, and a part-time controller didn't come for culture. They came because the checklists were clean and the work went home at a reasonable hour. We paid on Fridays by noon because reliability multiplies morale more than slogans ever will. I tracked every dollar like a gardener tracks rain. When surplus gathered, I didn't water rocks. I bought soil, a better staging environment for quiet systems, a modest content team to write the documentation our future clients would read before they ever spoke to us, a small research grant for a state university lab to model lead time volatility in domestic versus offshore components. None of it trended, all of it worked. The more we reinvested in unglamorous reliability, the more word of mouth replaced selling. Orders felt less like hunts and more like weather. Some nights, alone in the office, I'd open the family group chat and feel the old ache-rise photos of Sienna at pop-ups, my mother's captions landing like soft punches. So proud of our entrepreneur. I didn't reply, not out of spite but to preserve what I was building, a life that didn't hinge on their volume knob. I filed the photos away in a private album labeled Perspective and closed my phone. The spreadsheets were kinder than nostalgia. The first time my personal accounts crossed 7 figures, most of it retained earnings I hadn't paid myself yet. I didn't buy anything. I emailed our accountant to confirm our tax estimates, then walked to the river and watched the late sun shred itself on the water. Becoming a millionaire is less a bang than a hush if you arrive there by invoices and saved drafts. I didn't tell anyone. Certainly not my parents. Especially not Sienna. Secrets used to mean shame, now they meant stewardship. We released Quiet Systems 1.3 with a vendor scorecard module that small brands treated like gospel. We added a promise to pay ledger that prioritized the little suppliers who kept getting crushed by net 60 games. Clients swore their relationships improved because the system gave them courage to have honest conversations before a shortage became a social media apology. We turned those stories into anonymized case notes and fed them back into sales quietly, respectfully. Quarter by quarter, Nova Finch's IP held a little more gravity, and Quiet Harbor, our service arm, orbited it like a loyal moon. On my 25th birthday, the team surprised me with a cake decorated like a Gantt chart. I laughed so hard I cried. When everyone left and the office dimmed, I sat under light one and reread the line taped inside my old notebook. No one owes me an opportunity, but I owe myself one try. I had tried, and tried again, and built a foundation no one could repossess because it lived inside how I thought. The city outside murmured. Somewhere, a delivery truck hissed to a stop. I closed the last spreadsheet, powered down the monitors, and touched the lamp's warm neck the way you touch a pulse. Everything we did was legal, small, clean, and effective. The kind of work you could defend under oath or over coffee. The kind of work that doesn't make headlines until one day it quietly buys them. The first cracks didn't look like cracks at all, they looked like expansion. Willow and Wire announced new store openings in Dallas, Denver, Portland, and Miami all within 8 months. My social media feed turned into a highlight reel of ribbon cuttings and champagne toasts, every photo glowing with the kind of optimism that only borrowed money can buy. Sienna stood in front of a wall of pastel candles and macrame backdrops, smiling wide beneath captions like "Manifestation meets hustle." Our parents shared every post, every interview, every mention. "Your sister's brand is becoming a movement," Mom texted once, attaching a link to an article titled "The New Face of Ethical Handmade Retail." I read it. It sounded impressive until I noticed the numbers buried near the bottom 6 new leases, no mention of margins. That was the first time I felt the familiar ache return, the same blindness that had made them sacrifice my future for hers, now dressed in prettier language. Still, I said nothing. I had built my peace on silence, and I wasn't going to break it now. Quiet Harbor was thriving, Nova Finch was scaling, and my life finally operated on logic, not approval. But logic also made me curious. I started tracking Willow and Wire the same way I tracked my clients, purely out of habit, I told myself. I bookmarked their press releases, read between the lines of local articles, and even checked their shipping data through a public freight index. Everything screamed overextension. Freight volumes had doubled while retail revenue barely moved. Inventory turnover was sluggish. When I checked their hiring page, they were advertising for a director of expansion, which was usually corporate code for "no one's watching the numbers." A few months later, I was on a call with a client in Chicago when an alert popped up from one of the trade magazines I subscribed to: Willow and Wire secures new line of credit to fuel growth. The article mentioned a $750,000 revolving facility backed by personal guarantees. I didn't need to read the fine print to know what that meant. My parents' signatures were likely somewhere on those pages. That night, I sat under the brass glow of Light One, scrolling through every public record I could find. Store openings. Build-outs. Inventory imports. The debt curve climbed like a bad heartbeat. Mom called around that time, her voice sugar-sweet and vaguely performative, as though rehearsing for an invisible audience. "Your sister's doing so well," she said. She even got invited to speak at a Women in Business panel. "Aren't you proud?" I answered softly. "I'm always proud when things work out." It was true, technically. They just didn't catch the part where I was proud of the lesson that was coming, not the performance still playing. By the end of that summer, the headlines changed tone. Willow and Wire restructures operations amid rising costs. Founder blames supply delays for store closures. I knew what that kind of language meant. It was the vocabulary of unraveling. Still, our parents refused to see it. When I visited Austin briefly for a logistics conference, I ran into my father at a cafe near the hotel. He looked tired but carried the same quiet arrogance I remembered from those kitchen mornings. "Your sister's company is scaling faster than expected," he said between sips of coffee. "Growth always looks messy from the outside." I asked, "And from the inside?" He chuckled. "You wouldn't understand. Creative ventures take risk." He didn't ask about me. Didn't ask what I did or why I was there. Maybe he assumed I was still figuring myself out, wandering from gig to gig. That was fine. It was easier to let the past underestimate me. Then, one cold October morning, I saw it. An industry bulletin headline in clean black text. "Willow and Wire Files for Chapter 11. Protection Liabilities, estimated at $1.2 million." I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My reaction wasn't joy. It wasn't vindication. It was stillness, the kind that comes when every thread finally connects and the picture you've been ignoring sharpens into focus. The filing listed unpaid suppliers, 2 defaulted leases, and outstanding loans guaranteed by family partners. Their Dallas and Miami stores had already closed. Their main manufacturer in Mexico had cut ties after 6 months of unpaid invoices. I recognized the pattern, the same misalignment I'd built my career correcting for other people. Except this time, the client hadn't hired me. They'd dismissed me years ago at breakfast. An hour later, my mother posted a long message on Facebook. "Every business faces seasons. This is just one of them." We couldn't be prouder of Sienna's courage to keep creating. Challenges are just stepping stones to greatness. Hundreds of likes followed, neighbors, church friends, old family acquaintances leaving comments like, "So inspiring," and "Strong women raise stronger daughters." I read everyone silently. Then, without emotion, I right-clicked the bankruptcy article, saved it as a PDF, and filed it into a new folder on my desktop. W&W Data. That night, I made tea and sat at my desk, watching the amber light ripple across my notes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter. I didn't need to remind them what they'd done, or prove anything to anyone. Life was doing that for me line by line, invoice by invoice. Still, I wondered what dinner at their house must have been like that evening. Whether Dad still tapped his ring against his coffee mug when things went wrong. Whether Mom still used words like growth and faith to hide fear. Whether Sienna still believed she was destined for something bigger than accountability. I didn't reach out. I didn't call or comment or send a message. I had learned long ago that silence travels farther than any explanation. Instead, I opened my operations dashboard for quiet systems, reviewed a few client tickets, and scheduled tomorrow's team sync. Numbers, at least, kept their promises. When I shut down the laptop, the city outside was humming again, same as it always had when I first arrived in Austin with nothing but a duffel bag and $950 in tips. Only now, I had offices, contracts, a company worth millions, and a peace they'd never understand. They had chosen her once. The world had chosen the truth later. And the truth was patient. The notice was dry and clinical when it finally landed in my inbox. A docket number, an address on the edge of an industrial park, and a spreadsheet listing everything that once made up my sister's kingdom: inventory pallets, fixtures, a customer email list, a website domain, trademarks, social handles, even the rolling racks from the flagship store. Chapter 11 had become Chapter 7. Restructure had become liquidation. The last sentence of the notice read like a dare. Assets to be sold in lots to highest qualified bidder. I read it twice, then forwarded it to my attorney with 6 words: Nova Finch will be the bidder. There wasn't anything dramatic about the decision. It felt like brushing dust off a lens until the view snapped into focus. We had the capital. We had the systems. We knew exactly why Willow and Wire failed and exactly how it could have lived if it had been boring on purpose. And we had a shell company built for precisely this: Nova Finch LLC, quiet by design, separate by law, a vault for intellectual property that didn't require anyone's approval or applause. The only rule I gave our counsel was the only rule that mattered: anonymity. Harper Quinn could not appear anywhere she didn't have to. If names had to be printed, they would be the names that kept the work safe. The auction hall was a former call center with drop ceilings and a scuffed linoleum floor that hummed under fluorescent strips. Jordan and I arrived early with our attorney, Maria, a woman whose calm could slow a riot. We didn't take the main entrance. We registered through a side office with one plastic plant and a clipboard on a chain. Proof of funds went across the glass, a letter from the bank and a secured cashier's check for the required deposit. The clerk stamped our bidder number and slid it forward without looking up. The number was ordinary, forgettable. Perfect. Inside, the assets were itemized on a projection screen as if they were curios at a yard sale. Lot 14. Packaging inventory, mixed sizes and styles. Lot 22. Website domain and admin credentials, as is. Lot 23. Email list and CRM export, subject to privacy compliance. Lot 24. Intellectual property, trademarks, logos, brand guidelines. A handful of bidders clustered in little islands of speculation. 2 liquidation guys who smelled like warehouses, a buyer from a mall-based gift chain, a DTC aggregator whispering into her phone. Every now and then someone said, brand equity, like a prayer. No one said, cash conversion cycle, or lead time variance. No one said the words that would have saved the company. I took out a pen and marked our target lots in the catalog. We would let the furniture go, let the fixtures go, let the pretty boxes go. We'd buy the assets that breathed, the IP, the domain, the email list, the spine, and the nervous system. Maria touched my elbow before it began. "You're sure?" she asked softly. I nodded. "We're not here for trophies," I said. "We're here for tools." She smiled almost imperceptibly. "Then we'll leave with tools." Bidding started with the easy temptations. A pallet of unsold holiday candles went cheap to a liquidator who looked thrilled to be early to Christmas in March. Display tables fetched more than they were worth because they were visible, solid, easy to imagine in the window of a hopeful new shop. I kept my bitter paddle flat in my lap and let the room spend energy on things that would not return it. Jordan leaned close, tone neutral. "The aggregator's eyes are on the domain," he murmured. "They'll push that lot." I nodded. "We'll push back exactly once." Lot 22 came up sooner than I expected. The domain, the site, the admin keys. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like a shuffled deck of cards, started too high, danced down to reality, took off again. The aggregator raised. I raised once. When she raised again, I let her have it. Without the trademarks and list, the domain was a flag without a country. Jordan didn't even look confused. We had agreed on this strategy in the car: no orphans. If we couldn't assemble a living stack, we wouldn't collect parts. Lot 23. The email list. The room perked up. 1,000,000 addresses on paper sounded like 1,000,000 customers to the untrained ear. To me, it sounded like a liability without consent and a miracle if handled well. Maria had already reviewed the privacy disclosures with the trustee. The data could transfer with proper notice and opt-outs. I bid, and this time the room didn't chase. The liquidators didn't want ones and zeros. The mall buyer didn't want a CSV file. The aggregator hesitated, calculating the cost of compliance, and lowered her paddle. The gavel fell. Our clerk scribbled Nova Finch beside the lot number. The first building block slid across the table with a quiet click. Lot 24. The intellectual property. This was the heart. Without it, you could sell the leftover candles, but not the story on the label. I could feel my pulse steadying, the way it did when a client finally told the truth about their numbers. The opening ask was modest, and still no one moved. The liquidators didn't trade in ideas. The chain buyer didn't want a legacy they couldn't control. I raised my paddle and waited. The aggregator sniffed once more at the air, then shook her head. The gavel came down again. Another click. The spine and the nervous system now belonged to us. Only then did Lot 22 return, reoffered after no sale. This time, with IP in our pocket and the list already ours, the domain's value was obvious to anyone doing the math. We bid to a number I had written in ink no higher, not $1. The room tried to make a drama out of it. We refused. At the precise number, the gavel fell to us. Maria exhaled a breath I didn't know she'd been holding. The clerk printed a new sheet with our totals. If I'd wanted to savor the moment, I would have felt something like irony, but all I felt was alignment. We were assembling a patient that could be brought back, not as a spectacle, but as a healthy, smaller animal that would never again be starved for the sake of a photo. In the last hour, a secondary lot came up that made my throat tighten. Personal items, assorted framed photos, engraved ribbon, cutting scissors, desk trinkets. The bidding started low. I could have raised my paddle, bought back childhood fragments, carried home proof that the world had once applauded the wrong lessons. I kept my hands in my lap. No trophies, I said quietly. Jordan didn't ask if I was sure. He just nodded, as if to place one more brick in the boundary I'd built around my piece. The liquidator bought the box for pennies and looked almost apologetic. I wasn't. Memory is not an asset class. We closed at $210,000, all in 1/10 of the last valuation I'd seen bragged about on my mother's Facebook 2 years earlier. 10% went down on the spot, the balance wired before close of business on Monday. The trustee moved with practiced efficiency, summoning forms that assigned marks and domains, triggering transfer emails for social handles, listing the steps for a proper CRM export. Maria triple-checked the language around data privacy and made me initial the clause about post-transfer notifications. "We'll do it better than the law requires," I told her. She adjusted her glasses and said, "I assumed you would." In a small conference room that smelled like old toner, a man slid a ring of keys across a laminate table. They were ordinary keys, warehouse doors, a back office, a battered filing cabinet, but their weight was disproportionate to their size. Cold in the palm. Honest. I wrapped my fingers around them and felt nothing triumphant, only a responsibility I chose. The first time they'd asked me to be proud to support the family. It had been an extraction. This time, support felt like architecture. It would not look like the past. We left through the same side door, into a parking lot that had baked under a weak sun all morning. In the car, no one spoke for a minute. The air smelled like coffee and heat. Jordan finally broke the quiet. "So," he said, matter of fact, "what do we call it?" I watched the light stutter across the windshield and said, "Second light." He smiled without teeth. Fitting. The next 3 weeks were a choreography of resurrection without romance. Our team stood up a sandbox copy of the site and stripped it to studs. Fewer SKUs, clear taxonomy, honest stock messages, lead times that didn't lie. We wrote a plain English. Frequently asked questions about continuity and consent, drafted an email explaining the sale, and made opt-out frictionless. We reached out to vendors in order of smallest and most hurt first, not because it made the best PR, but because it made the best sense of the world. We killed wholesale terms that had bankrupted good people. We renegotiated MOQs and case packs to match actual velocity, not holiday fantasies. Jordan reskinned the store with a palette that didn't scream handmade so loudly it forgot to be useful, calm grays, a softer serif, negative space that breathed. I wrote a single paragraph for the About page. "We are a small team that believes in fewer, better things and the dignity of paying on time. If you were hurt by the previous entity, here's what we're doing next." No confessions. No theater. Just the plan. We filed the trademark for Second Light Co. under Nova Finch. We moved the IP through a clean daisy chain so that, if anyone ever tugged, the rope wouldn't snap at my name. I signed the necessary places as CEO of the holding company and declined every optional line where founder story usually lives. I had no interest in becoming the face. I had an interest in building something that could keep its promises when no one was looking. On the Friday before launch, we stood in the warehouse under a different kind of fluorescent light, the kind that has been cleaned, aligned, and replaced when it flickers. The aisles were labeled. The bin locations made sense. The pick lists were short and kind. A former employee of Willow and Wire, hired back with a new contract and better pay, walked through the space trailing her fingers along a shelf. "It's never been this quiet," she said, meaning organized. I nodded. Quiet is the point. No. That evening, Jordan leaned against the doorframe of my office while I reviewed the final checklist. "You going to tell them?" he asked, and he didn't need to say who them was. I looked up at the lamp on my desk, light one, steady as ever, and then at the keys resting beside the keyboard. "No," I said. "Not now, maybe not ever. This isn't revenge." He tilted his head. "What is it then?" I closed the laptop and stood, the day's fatigue settling into my bones like a satisfied animal. "It's a chance to let them understand without me saying a word." He considered that, then nodded once. Silence it is. Outside, the last of the daylight folded itself into the city. We locked up one key, then another, and the building exhaled into stillness. In the quiet, I could hear the hum I had learned to trust, the one that isn't applause or crisis, just a system at rest, ready. The first time in my life someone asked me to be proud, they meant obedient. Now, pride meant stewardship. Buying the mess, not to gloat, but to make it work the way it always should have. The next morning, second light would flicker on. No confetti. No speech. Just a notice sent to a million inboxes saying, simply, "We're here. If you want to leave, we'll make it easy. If you want to stay, we'll make it better." And somewhere, hours or days later, a phone would start ringing in a house where people still believed growth was louder than truth. I wouldn't pick up. Not yet. The understanding would have to arrive the way mine did under fluorescent lights, with no one clapping, when the math finally speaks and there's nothing left to argue with. A year is a long time if you measure it in invoices and solved problems. It's short if you measure it in what people expect of you. By the time 12 months had passed, Second Light had settled into the rhythm I'd wanted from the beginning. Fewer SKUs that actually turned, vendor terms that respected both sides of a handshake, promises kept in small, boring ways. We didn't launch new collections with fireworks, we refined the ones that deserved to exist. We didn't chase wholesale for the vanity of shelf space, we said no until the math said yes. Customers noticed not with screaming comments, but with something better. Repeat orders, lower return rates, quiet thank you notes sent at 2 a.m. after a package arrived when we said it would. The brand stopped pretending to be big and started being reliable. Reliability, it turned out, was newsworthy. The first article called Second Light, a case study in humane operations. It ran on a niche retail blog that only people like me read, outlining how we'd bought a broken craft label out of bankruptcy and rebuilt it as a lean, debt-averse vendor. First business. They included a quote from an anonymous supplier who said, "I didn't think I'd ever trust that name again." Then the new team paid our oldest invoice with interest. I cried in my truck. No one asked who we were, they asked how we did it. That was my favorite kind of curiosity. Momentum is a tide. A regional business journal picked up the story next, then a national e-commerce newsletter. The paragraph that kept getting copied was the one Jordan wrote for our site. "We believe in fewer, better products, and in keeping our word to the people who make them, ship them, and buy them." Simple sentences, sharp as a scalpel. Reporters liked that we declined to give a founder origin myth. They liked that the team photo on our About page was a shelf with labeled bins. They liked that our roadmap was 2 bullet points. Pay people on time, don't lie with lead times. It was boring, it was radical. Then the glossy piece landed. A mid-tier magazine with a habit of crowning quiet rebels ran a feature titled Second Light Co., a former family brand, now reimagined by Nova Finch CEO Harper Quinn. It wasn't a hit piece. It wasn't even dramatic. It was precise. It traced the public filings any determined reader could have found, explained the bankruptcy auction, named Nova Finch as the acquirer, and identified me as its CEO, citing corporate records and interviews with vendors who'd agreed to speak on background. They quoted me twice from an old talk where I'd said, "There's dignity in unglamorous competence," and where I'd refused to answer a question about my ties to the original founders. The photos were of hands, shelves, cartons, a packing slip being scanned. Nothing personal. Everything personal. The story posted at 6:12 a.m. Austin time. By 6:18, my phone lit up like an alarm panel. First came the unknown numbers blocked, out of state, the kind that follow a press release around. Then a familiar ringtone I hadn't heard at that volume in years. Mom. I watched the call glow against my desk for 3 rings, 4, 5, then fade. It returned, immediately, as if the silence had been a mistake. 17 times that morning, her name bloomed across my screen like a stubborn weed. Between those calls, my father's voicemail filled with that same stern warmth he used to save for lectures. "Harper, call me back. We need to talk about what you're doing. That is a family company. You can't just this isn't how family handles things." Another message: "Whatever you think happened, this is not the answer. You need to sell it back. We'll make this right together." He didn't say the words college fund. He didn't say we're sorry. He said family like a deed he believed he still held. At 8:04, Sienna's email arrived. The subject line read, "A chance to talk, please." The body was long, spilling across the monitor with the same breathless energy she used for product captions, only this time the commodity was grace. "Harper, I didn't know it was you. If I had known, things would be different. I just need one more shot to prove I can lead. The brand is my heart. You know how much I poured into Willow and Wire. You've always been so good with numbers. With systems, maybe we can do this together? I can take creative and community, you can handle operations. The press is saying such nice things. Imagine how powerful it would be to tell the world sisters rebuilt this. Call me, please. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel less. That was never my intention. I was under pressure. I am still under pressure." I read it twice, then let my eyes rest on the last line. "I know you're the right person to fix what I started." It sounded like flattery. It was finally an admission. But even apologies carry terms when they show up after a headline. I didn't respond. I opened my notebook, took the cap off my pen, and wrote a single line under today's date. They found out because the work was visible, not because I talked. Then I went back to my checklist. The warehouse needed a new tape machine. The vendor ledger needed 3 reconciliation emails. Customer support had a draft reply for me to edit the one we'd prepared for the inevitable handful of messages that would say, "Wait, weren't you those people who stiffed us?" Our answer was the same as it had been since day one. We are a different entity, with different leadership and different values. We will never ask you to believe us. We will show you. Around noon, Jordan appeared in my doorway with 2 coffees and his face arranged in that careful neutrality he keeps for volatile news. He set 1 cup beside light one and raised an eyebrow. "You've seen it?" he asked, meaning the article. I nodded. He didn't mention the calls piling up on my screen, or the way my mother's name kept flashing and vanishing like a distant lighthouse. He just said, "Our inbound doubled. Suppliers are sending referrals. One of the ones who swore us off last year just asked to come back with updated terms." He took a sip. "I'll draft a statement for press inquiries. No comment plus a link to the vendor policy." We worked through lunch. The office hummed the way good spaces do. Printers exhaled, carts rolled softly, screens clicked open and closed. At 2, I stepped into the small glassed-in conference room we never used for theatrics and watched the street for a minute. A delivery truck backing into a bay, a woman jogging with a stroller, a dog determined to smell every metal pole within a city block. The ordinary world continued, indifferent to revelations. My phone buzzed again against my palm. This time, the voicemail transcription populated while it rang. My father's voice, clipped and almost formal. "If you don't return this call by end of day, we will involve counsel. This is a matter of reputation and..." The transcript cut off. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Maria called shortly after, laughing softly in that way only lawyers can when someone threatens the wrong statute. "Tell your father corporate separateness is not a mood," she said. "There's nothing to involve unless he wants to sue the public record." Her tone softened. "You okay?" I looked at the lamp, at the keys on my desk, at the folder where I'd kept every document from the auction, every notification we'd sent, every opt-out we'd honored. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm busy." In late afternoon, the magazine emailed asking if I wanted to add comment for a follow-up piece. I wrote 2 sentences and deleted them. I drafted a paragraph and deleted that too. I let the cursor blink like a heartbeat until it slowed, then closed the window. We had already said everything we intended to say on the site, what we made, how we paid, what we believed. The rest belonged to the math. Calls became a metronome. The screen lit, dimmed, lit again. The old house number. Mom's cell. Unknown. Unknown. The family group chat pinged with blue bubbles stacking into a wall. "Harper? This isn't you. We are trying to understand. Answer the phone." A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years texted, "You really did this?" with a string of wide-eye emojis that read like accusations dressed as awe. I set the phone face down, turned the ringer off, and let the silence thicken into something protective. As evening pulled itself across the windows, the office emptied. The warehouse lights clicked to night mode. The building's hum settled into the soft, contented sound I trusted more than any speech. I stayed. I turned on the brass lamp and let its warm circle pool across my desk. Paperwork, tidy and inevitable, fanned out around it, renewals to sign, vendor thank you notes I answered by hand, a stack of old thank yous from customers who'd written to say a gift arrived on the right day and made a mess heal for an hour. On the wall, our values sat printed on cheap paper in a cheap frame. Pay on time. Tell the truth about time. Choose small vendors first. It looked almost silly. It worked like religion. The phone buzzed again, the 17th call that day from my mother. I watched her name pulse once in the reflection on the glass of the conference room door. For a second, old instinct reached for me, the version of myself trained to pick up, to smooth, to make it easier for everyone else. I let the instinct pass. I let the call roll to voicemail and then to silence. I tried to imagine their kitchen that night. My father pacing, trying to find a legal angle that didn't exist. My mother composing and deleting messages no one would read. Sienna refreshing the article, zooming in on my name as if the pixels would blur back into her own. Maybe they sat at the same table where I'd learned the sound of my father's ring on ceramic, the sound that used to introduce a lesson about how the world works. I wondered if he still tapped when the lesson didn't go his way. Jordan texted a photo from the warehouse before he left, the new tape machine installed, a neat line of packages labeled, a team member giving a thumbs up in the background. "We're good here. Go home when you're ready." I stared at the image until the ache in my chest loosened. Work as proof. Work as answer. When the building was quiet enough to hear the air conditioner change registers, I spoke out loud, softly, to no one. If they wanted me to save the family business, I did. Just not the family. The words didn't taste bitter. They tasted exact. I didn't save the hierarchy that had taught me to disappear. I saved the part of the story that could be redeemed. Pay who you owe, tell the truth, build small and strong and on purpose. I shut down my computer, stacked the papers into a square, and placed the keys in their tray, the warehouse, the office, a new filing cabinet that contained contracts I could show to anyone. On my way out, I paused in the doorway and looked back at the pool of light on the desk. In another life, that glow would have been a spotlight, begging me to explain, to justify, to perform hurt or magnanimity, to give everyone a scene they could forgive. In this life, it was just a lamp. It was enough. Outside, the evening air felt cool and clean. I walked to my car slowly, letting my body remember what it means to leave a place when the work is done, and not because you've been told to go. My phone, silent now, sat heavy in my pocket like a stone I'd finally decided not to skip. Somewhere, a notification waited to announce another article, another take. Somewhere else, a woman opened a box from us and found a candle that smelled like orange peels and cedar, and a little bit like hope. When I reached the driver's side, the screen woke with one last vibration, an email this time, from a vendor we'd paid ahead of schedule. I heard the news, but I already knew what mattered. You pay on time. That's the only press I need. I smiled, slid into the seat, and let the quiet fill in what the headlines never could. Recognition, yes. But not the kind my family taught me to starve for. This recognition belonged to systems that worked, to people who could plan because we kept our word. It belonged to a second light, steadier than the first. And it would keep burning whether I answered the phone or not. They came on a Tuesday, the kind of day that exists mostly as a bridge between other things. I had just finished a vendor call and was reviewing the rollout calendar when the front desk pinged my extension. There's a couple here asking for you. No appointment. They're insistent. Through the glass, past the mezzanine, I could see our security guard, Luis, standing square in the lobby with his palms lifted in a practiced pose. My mother's posture rigid, chin lifted as if the air above her were a better altitude, was unmistakable. My father stood half a step behind, jaw tight, eyes scanning for leverage. Between them, in a slouch that looked like a costume she didn't know how to take off, was Sienna. I told the desk I'd come down. Not because they deserved the courtesy, but because I did. Boundaries aren't real until you can hold them in proximity. The elevator hummed to the lobby. The space smelled faintly of craft paper and cold air. Sunlight fell in through the doors and broke into rectangles across the polished concrete. Luis glanced at me with a quiet question. You sure? And I nodded. He moved just enough to let our guest step inside the vestibule, nothing more. Harper, my mother said, voice pitched between maternal and managerial. We've been calling. I noticed, I said. My father stepped forward, planting a smile that looked laminated. We can discuss this like adults. There's no need for theatrics. Theatrics would require an audience, I said. We don't do those here. For a beat, no one moved. I kept my hands loosely at my sides. I could feel the lamp-warm calm of my office still in my bones, the mechanical kindness of systems running upstairs. It steadied me in the way a railing steadies a stair. My mother blinked first. Are you doing this to punish us? She asked. The question came out thinner than she meant it to. Buying the company. The article, this. Performance of silence. Is this revenge? No, I said. I'm fixing what adults broke. My father's nostrils flared. Adults make hard choices. And then they own them, I said. Or they teach their children that promises mean nothing. Sienna shifted, and for a moment I saw the girl from the craft fair with glue on her fingers and the whole world applauding. She looked smaller now, and not because she'd lost anything in the papers. Loss is a public shape, this was private. Her eyes were red in the corners. I didn't know it was you, she said, voice rough. If I had known. You would have asked for more, I said, not unkindly. You always do. My mother bristled. She is your sister. And I am your daughter, I said. We can hold two truths without one disappearing. The lobby swallowed the sound of that. Outside, a delivery truck hissed to a stop. A woman wheeled a stroller past the glass. Somewhere behind me, the thermal label printer sang a brief line and slept again. Sienna took a breath that broke halfway through. I can help, she said. I know the community. The makers still know me. I can rebuild that trust. Let me come back, not as a favor, just let me do what I'm good at. She glanced at my mother, then back at me. I know I messed up, I do. But I can be the face while you do the operations. The word landed like it had always landed, with the faintest curl of dismissal, as if mechanics were lower than spark. You don't need a face, I said. You need integrity. Her eyes flashed, hurt flickering into anger. You think I don't have integrity? I think integrity is what you do when no one is clapping, I said. When a vendor is small and the payment is inconvenient. When a lead time slips and you tell the truth instead of making a story out of it. When you don't sign loans other people can't afford to honor. Integrity is dull. You were always bored by dull. My father exhaled, a controlled bleed. We didn't come here to be insulted. You came here to renegotiate gravity, I said. It doesn't move. My mother's voice softened, the way you soften a blade by wrapping it. Sweetheart, families fall apart over business. We don't want that. They fell apart over values, I said. Business just kept the receipts. Alu. No one spoke for a long 3 seconds. Then I reached into the folio I'd carried down and slid out a single page. It was printed on the same paper we used for vendor agreements, cheap, sturdy, honest, and it held exactly what it needed and not one flourish more. This is an offer, I said, and the word did not tremble in my mouth. Advisory only, community liaison is the title we gave it, but call it what you want. It pays well. You'd meet with the makers you said you championed, hear what they actually need, and translate that into programs we can fund without bankrupting them. You'd have a budget and oversight. You wouldn't have control. Not over inventory, not over hiring, not over messaging. You'd be held to the same metrics as everyone else. On time, honest, useful. I looked at Sienna. It's the job you offered the world in captions. This is the reality of it. She didn't reach for the page. Her mouth opened, then closed. My mother made a sound like a scoff swallowed into a cough. My father stared at the title block like staring hard enough could rearrange letters into a crown. Sienna finally took the paper. Her hands shook, only a little. She read the first paragraph, then the second. She stopped right where I knew she'd stop, the clause that specified that during tenure as advisor she would not represent herself as founder, former executive, or decision-maker of record. Her jaw tightened. This is humiliating, she said. It's honest, I said. It's what the work is, without the stage. Her eyes lifted to mine, glassy now. You're doing this to hurt me. I'm doing this to refuse a myth, I said. You can help people if you want. You cannot have the keys. For a heartbeat, the lobby held 2 sisters across a small square of polished floor, and every mile of history between us stood up and looked around. Sienna crumpled the page, slow at first, then with a kind of frantic finality, and tore it down the center. The sound was small and absolute. She dropped the halves to the floor like a sentence finished and took a step back. My mother inhaled, triumphant at last to find a role. There, she said, to no one and to me. She will not be humiliated. She will not learn, I said, as if clarifying an agenda item. I nodded to Luis. He stepped forward and, with a gentleness I was grateful for, bent to retrieve the paper. He placed the 2 pieces on the reception counter like artifacts. My father's voice dropped into his old register, the one he used to teach me the nature of consequence. You're making an enemy of your family, he said. No, I said. I'm choosing a family that includes people you never saw: warehouse workers, seamstresses, supplier reps who begged for 30 more days, the guy who drives the truck that brings the boxes. They were always part of this. You just edited them out of every photo. He flinched not at the words, but at the mirror they angled. My mother shifted tactics. What do you want, Harper? Money? Recognition? We can do a press release. We can tell the story together. We can. What I want is already happening, I said. Products that exist for a reason. A calendar without lies in it. Checks that clear before a vendor has to call their landlord. Sienna's voice returned, smaller. And what about us? I thought of the breakfast table. The ring on ceramic. The word proud used like a leash. I thought of invoices stamped paid with interest to people who had stopped expecting fairness. I thought of the lamp on my desk upstairs, haloing a circle of paper like a moon. You can call me when you can say, "I'm sorry," without asking for the keys, I said, not before. Something in my mother's face hardened. You've become cruel, she said. No, I said, I've become specific. We stood there in that specificity. Outside, the delivery truck pulled away. The baby in the stroller laughed at something the air didn't share with us. A courier wheeled a dolly past the glass and didn't look in. I turned to Luis. Please walk them out, I said, and then to my parents, to my sister. You don't need to come back without an appointment. If you do, security will handle it the same way. My father drew breath like he might make a scene. My mother touched his sleeve, warning. Sienna looked at the halves of the offer on the counter, some thought snagging there like a thread, then lifted her chin as if remembering an old photograph of herself. They left without turning. Luis paced them to the door, opened it, and let the outdoor heat flatten the lobby for a second before the seal closed and the building's cool returned. I thanked him, then stepped back into the elevator, watching their figures shrink in the fisheye of the camera as the doors slid shut. The carriage hummed up through the floors. When it opened, the office air met me with the familiar scent of cardboard and citrus cleaner. Jordan was at his desk, headset on, giving a gentle yes to a vendor's proposed change and a firm no to their desire to revisit Net 60. He lifted 2 fingers in a question. I nodded, "I'm fine," and walked past to my office. On my desk, the contract with the regional chain waited, a tidy stack clipped in black. We'd negotiated that deal for 3 months, not because the volume dazzled us, but because the terms finally respected what we protect. Replenishment windows that match reality. Penalties for promotional overreach that bleed suppliers. A returns policy that doesn't pretend mistakes evaporate. I read it one more time, touched the clause that mattered most, and signed on the line that said Nova Finch LLC above my name. The signature dried in the lamplight. I sat back, listened to the building breathe, and let the sound recalibrate the room. Confrontation hadn't changed anything fundamental. It rarely does. Boundaries aren't invitations to war. They're the architecture that lets a life exist. Downstairs, 2 halves of an offer lay on a counter, a small torn witness to the fact that I had given my family the only role I could, one that asked them to be useful without being sovereign. They had declined. The work went on. I emailed the chain's buyer a scanned copy, then sent Jordan the green check he'd been waiting for. He answered with a thumbs-up emoji, and 5 seconds later, a celebratory photo from the warehouse. The team grinning behind a first pallet dressed in our new, unremarkable tape. In the corner of the image, the date stamp read clean and correct. The only spotlight in the frame was a fluorescent bar, humming, ordinary, faithful. I closed my eyes for a breath, opened them, and picked up the next folder. Outside, the city held its shape. Upstairs, the lamp kept its circle. Downstairs, the security camera blinked and then forgot, as cameras do. And somewhere a ring tapped a cup in a kitchen miles away, looking for an old script that no longer played. Growth doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it slips in quietly like dawn, unnoticed until you realize everything looks different in its light. Within 2 years, Second Light Co. had become more than just a redemption story whispered in Austin's business circles. It was a blueprint for sustainable rebirth. We closed our 3rd fiscal year with $9.8 million in revenue and a profit margin that stunned even our accountant, $2.3 million after taxes. But what mattered wasn't the commas. It was the fact that we paid every vendor on time, every employee above industry standard, and every promise we made in full. Our systems were clean, our data honest, and our reputation ironically untouchable. When we opened our first satellite facility in Seattle, the ribbon cutting wasn't covered by local TV or live streamed. It was just a handful of people who'd believed in order, standing under a cloudy sky, holding paper cups of coffee, watching a new logo flicker to life on a warehouse wall. Denver followed 6 months later, a converted brick factory with lavender growing along its loading dock, an unplanned detail that felt like grace. Jordan handled the expansion logistics. I focused on the new entity I'd been quietly building in the background, the Quiet Harbor Foundation. The idea came one evening when I saw a scholarship notice taped to a community board near our Austin office. The amount, $1,000, was less than what I used to pay for a single month's rent above that taco shop years ago. I thought about how much that small number could have changed the timeline of my life if it had arrived when I needed it. So I wrote a check for $100,000 from Nova Finch's account, then another from my personal funds, and registered the foundation under the same principle that had rebuilt my business. No drama, just function. The Quiet Harbor Foundation provided microgrants to students who'd lost funding due to family emergencies that were really just favoritism disguised as necessity. It offered zero-interest loans to small craft businesses that wanted to grow but refused to exploit. We didn't ask for essays or tears, we asked for proof of intent and a willingness to try again. Every month, we received letters, some handwritten, some emailed, from recipients describing what that second chance meant. A student in Ohio who could finally pay tuition on time. A baker in Arizona who reopened her shop after a flood. None of them knew who I was. That anonymity was the point. Then Forbes Local called. They'd heard of the foundation and wanted to feature the 20-something CEO who turned a failed family business into a model of modern ethics. I almost said no. But Jordan reminded me, visibility used right helps the mission. Not your ego, your impact. So I agreed. The interview took place in a minimalist studio with 2 bright lights and a journalist who smiled with professional curiosity. She asked all the expected questions. How I started, how it felt to be labeled self-made under 30, what motivated me. Then she leaned forward, her voice softening into the question that everyone wanted answered. Do you ever regret how things ended with your family? I paused, not to search for the answer, but to give it weight. Only that I expected fairness, I said, from people who taught me competition. The quote became the headline. Some called it cold, others called it profound. I didn't correct either group. A week later, the issue arrived at our office. My photo sat beneath bold text. Harper Quinn, the engineer of quiet empires. My team taped it discreetly on the break room wall. I walked by it once, smiled, and went back to work. By the end of that quarter, Nova Finch had diversified into 3 subsidiaries, and my personal account carried a balance that would have made my father speechless enough to buy back the old house twice over, pay off every loan they'd ever signed, and still have a few million left to breathe. Jordan once asked me if I wanted to. It's poetic, you know, he said. Full circle. I shook my head. Poetry needs emotion. This needs peace. Instead, I bought a small cabin near Lady Bird Lake. Not the grand kind you post on social media, just a 1-story cedar structure with white curtains and a wraparound porch that smelled of rain. I planted lavender along the edge of the yard and strung soft lights across the railing. In the mornings, I worked there with the windows open. In the evenings, I brewed tea, turned off my phone, and listened to the wind scatter the lake's surface like a memory trying to settle. When the first lavender bloom opened that spring, I stood barefoot on the porch, the same pair of hands that once scrubbed taco shop dishes now steady enough to grow something delicate. The scent was faint but certain proof that things could thrive quietly, without applause, without permission. I didn't need the house I'd left behind. I didn't need the validation they withheld. I had built something they could neither define nor destroy. The headlines would fade, the sales would fluctuate, but the foundation, the quiet one, would outlast all of it. In the soft hum of evening, I realized the truth I'd spent years trying to earn. Success wasn't about reclaiming what was stolen. It was about refusing to measure your worth by thieves. That night, the city was wrapped in a hush. From my office window, the lake shimmered like liquid glass, and the lamp on my desk. Light one, still the same brass lamp from my first apartment, glowed steady in the reflection. My phone vibrated once, twice, 3 times. The names were the same as they'd always been. Mom, Dad, Sienna. I didn't pick up. Not out of anger. Anger had long burned itself into ash, but because the answer had already been given. I opened my voicemail app and recorded one final message, my voice calm, almost gentle. "I've already answered," I said. "Just not in words." I hit send and turned off the phone.